It is Thursday, the 13th of May, 2021, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside, around the UK and internationally. I'm your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello. It sounded like you forgot what we were then. There was a little pause before you said podcast. What are we?
Yeah, I mean, we've only been doing this for like 12 years. It's not that big a deal, is it?
Well, we're thrown because we can see each other.
That's how people can tell that the intro is not pre-recorded.
Yeah, because you fuck it up occasionally. You know, it's like that whole thing of leaving an incorrect stitch in the rug because only Allah is perfect.
Yeah.
You're exactly the same, but with podcasting rugby. I thought about this the other day, and I really wanted somebody to cross-stitch only Allah is perfect, but get the stitching wrong, so like the H was too short, so it looked like only Alan is perfect. I thought that'd be a nice thing.
So how you guys been doing?
I'm all right. I'm low energy today. I was given my second Pfizer jab yesterday, so I'm now officially fully Pfizered.
Yeah,
I've had both my Pfizers. Although I don't know for certain whether this constitutes a second dose or whether this constitutes a third dose, because they said if you've had it before, if you actually had COVID and then got vaccinated, you may not need another vaccine because the vaccine counts as the booster rather than an initial vaccine.
Right.
This might be a second dose. This might be a third dose. I'm dosed, though. And
fully dosed.
I've seen people have pretty bad side effects to the second one. I was dosed about, 32 hours ago, and I've been all right, but I'm a little bit niggly, a little bit of a headache, a little bit achy, but fully vaccinated. Boom. Come lick me.
Excellent. Good.
Exciting.
So how was it? Was it much the same as last time? Was it all business, all perfunctory? Sit down, Mr. Marshall. Did they have to look at your little appointment card? Was it?
I mean, they looked at the little appointment card. They wrote, the have you had it before card. They went, oh, yep, right on that. There you go. Have that back. And it was literally, again, a 2-minute thing. Just walked right up to the building. As I get to the door of the building, it's like, oh, what's your name? Yeah, okay. In there now, out within 2 minutes.
Did you have to sit down 15 minutes after?
I did, because of the Pfizer.
Oh, is that specifically a Pfizer thing?
It's because there were some people in the trials that I think passed out or fainted or something like that.
Felt a bit faint, right, yeah.
And while they couldn't say that's because of the vaccine, they couldn't rule out that it was a side effect of the vaccine. And so they say, give yourself 15 minutes. Because
Alice and I had AstraZeneca, and I don't know about Alice, but from me having the shot to me standing on the street was about a minute.
Yeah.
It was just...
Yeah, we didn't have to have a break.
Here's a shot now, get the fuck out.
Yeah, I don't want to see you ever again.
And I was still doing my tie-up, because I had to basically get undressed because in order for them to access my arm. So I was still doing my tie-up when I was walking out of the building. That's how quickly I was out of the door. There's no nice 15-minute refractory period where someone comes on and gives you a foot rub or whatever. I don't know what happens in the 15 minutes.
It wasn't a refractory period, because that would suggest I was waiting to get vaccinated again 15 minutes later. So if I am of low energy at all during this podcast, it's not because I'm disengaged with the fascinating, interesting analyses from you chaps. It's because, well, A, I am post-vaccinated, and B, I'm only just back from holiday. I was on holiday for the early part of last week. We booked this pretty last minute. Nicola decided it would be a lovely thing for us to do, to go somewhere where there was trees and fields and walking and things. And so she booked us the Shepherd's Hut in Winkle. So we stayed in the Shepherd's Winkle.
Good.
And the thing about this Shepherd's Hut is it's on a farm, but rather than being a building, it's more of a shed/porter cabin with a double bed and stove in it. And that's basically all that was it, and shower in it. And the stove was literally so close to the bed that you had to sort of move around the edge of the bed to get to the stove. And then you're immediately into the shower and toilet. And once I got in, I realized why I recognized the shape of this thing. And I'm 99% sure it was a converted horse box. You know, that they used to transport horses in?
Yes.
I think it was that.
Yeah.
So we stayed in one of those in the middle of a field in Winkle, near Macclesfield, to go wandering around the Peak District. And what was lovely about it was we were in the middle of like naturey stuff, trees and fields and loads of sheep just wandering by us at all time, constantly pissing it down. relentlessly raining. The only times that it really stopped raining was when it was snowing or hailstorming.
Good.
So it was, a genuinely charming 3 days of British springtime weather in the middle of a field in a horse box with a stove.
They've had you on there, though, haven't they? They've told you that's a holiday and then put you in a horse box in the rain for 3 days.
Yeah, they just rented their shed to us.
And after COVID, you'll take it as a holiday.
We will take it as a holiday, that's fair.
And you know what? It was delightful because it wasn't my own house and I wasn't just staring at the same buildings that I've looked at for the last 15 months or something.
I also took a week off last week. And because it rained constantly, I decided this was finally the time I was going to paint my kitchen. Because we got our kitchen done, 18 months ago nearly? And we've just had bare plaster on the ceiling since then and the lights hanging down ready for us to paint it. So I finally painted every part of my kitchen. And painting a kitchen is a pain in the fucking arse. It took 4 days to prep it all, to take everything out of the kitchen, to prep it all, to wash the walls, to sand it all down before we wash the walls, not after we wash the walls. Paint it all, paint the ceiling 5 times to get it to actually be fully white. It took forever.
Do you have a roller on a stick? Was it up a ladder with a brush, or was it roller on a stick?
Up a ladder with a roller.
Okay, halfway house. That's fair enough.
I mean, the roller's the useful bit. The stick is optional.
Parts of the ceiling you can reach from the worktops. The problem is I broke my step. I have a little step that is useful for living in a house with such high ceilings. We can store things high up, but I can't always reach things that are high up. So I have a little step. But I managed to break the step on the first day, just smashed it to pieces. So I was climbing up and down on the worktops without a step, and then gave myself 3 massive bruises down the length of my shin from climbing up and down on the worktops. So that was fun. But yeah, a lovely way to spend my holiday, watching the rain out the window, thinking this is going to be miserable from March outside in the countryside.
In his horse box.
In his horse box.
We'll be able to see your kitchen soon because we are, as of next week, allowed to see each other again. Which means we might even be able to do the next show live together.
Do a show.
Not live, but in person live.
Yeah.
In person together, yeah.
Like record the show like we used to back in the olden days.
The old-fashioned...
When Alice had a working step.
The analog days.
Wait, but we don't have a place to record it now because your office is gone. Well, no, your office is still there, but it's not your office anymore.
But it's not my office anymore because I don't work there anymore. Yeah. Oh, we'll have to figure that out. Details, folks.
My tiny little office. We won't have dogs.
We're doing production meetings on air again. Is that what we're doing?
That is exactly what's happening.
A few episodes ago, I talked about being diagnosed with autism last year and how difficult a process that was to go through, kind of fighting against the medical establishment in order to have someone pay attention to me. And the response to that from listeners was really genuinely amazing. So many of you got in touch, offering well wishes, thanking me for being so open about my experience, or telling me your own stories of being diagnosed as some stripe of neurodivergent. 1 or 2 people even got in touch to say that listening to my story made them realize that maybe they were autistic too, and that they were going to go off and pursue that themselves, and so maybe this is true for me as well. So I wanted to say thank you to everyone who emailed in or messaged me on Twitter or whatever, and that love and that support and that kindness genuinely meant so much to me. So thanks very much to everybody for that one. The few weeks since I spoke about my autism on the episode have probably been some of the most difficult I've had to deal with in a long time. I mentioned on air a few weeks ago that I was out of work and looking for a new job. And that wasn't really a problem in and of itself. Obviously, no one likes being out of work, but it was something that, you just get on with. Okay, I'm going to get up and search job sites and apply for jobs and, go to interviews and smile and be happy and be like, yeah, I can write code.
Did you do much circling things in newspapers? That's quite a
circling stuff in newspapers with a red pen.
With a red pen,
yeah, that one. Not a lot of that these days. It's a bit old hat, isn't it? Maybe when we're taping the next show, we're back in the in old hat mode. And again, several listeners got in touch and said, "Hey, I've got a possible job opportunity for you," which was kind of amazing, and again, something that I very much appreciated. It really was. It was genuinely cool that people were coming forward and saying, "Hey, come, I've got something you might be interested in." And I pursued some of those things. None of it actually panned out, but I pursued several of those things. So looking for work wasn't really a big deal for me. The problem started when I found some work. One of the things I find most difficult to cope with is large-scale changes in my life and my routine. And starting a new job has been the biggest change that I've had to face in a long time. Not only am I working with a new team on a new product, but I'm also working in a slightly different technology, one that I'm not amazingly comfortable in. And I've also gone from working in a small startup to working in a global multinational. And all of that has actually been a profoundly distressing experience for me.
I mean, you've basically been in charge of the technology for the last, 20 years of working, and now you're not directly in charge of what technology you use and how?
Yeah, certainly that's the last 15 years. I've decided, what's getting done, how we're going to do it, in what order we're going to do it, whether what we've done has been good enough or not. And even though I'm at a comparable level in terms of my nominal role within the team, the difference between being at that level in a small startup where you're basically top of the tree and doing a comparable job in a global multinational where you're nowhere near the top of the tree, it's a very, very different environment.
Yeah, you've gone from being the drummer in a one-man band to the drummer in a band, and those are very different things.
Yeah. So that's been really difficult for me. I've been struggling to eat. I've been struggling to concentrate while I'm at work. I feel like I'm a fraud. I feel like I'm a failure. My anxiety levels have been through the roof. I really can't express how challenging a situation that has been for me. Going from the director of my own startup, where I knew everything about everything. I knew every line of code, every system, every service. I knew all of it, upside down, back to front.
However unhealthy that ended up being for you.
But I've gone from that environment to knowing nothing about anything. And people-wise, I've gone from a startup of a dozen people to, as I say, a global multinational, where I used to know everybody and everybody knew me. And now I don't know anybody at all. I used to be able to just call the company CEO up for a chat and, say, how you doing? And now the company CEO doesn't even know that I exist.
Like you ever called anybody for just a chat.
No, but I could.
Just knowing that the possibility was there was enough.
And imposter syndrome is exceptionally common among software developers as well. This is, for people who don't know, well, I think most people are passingly familiar with it, but this is where an individual doubts their own competence and skills and fears being exposed as a fraud by their peers. And a lot of developers struggle with this, myself included, and so that's been looming large for me as well. It's so prevalent in the software developer community. Occasionally you'll have periods where leaders within the developer community, people who are, in relatively senior positions in companies like Apple and Google and Microsoft will go on Twitter and tell stories about how badly they fuck stuff up, just to kind of reassure people who are like, junior developers, don't worry, we all fuck it up. Don't worry, everyone is shit at this. Just some are less shit than others, but we're all shit. So imposter syndrome has been looming large for me. Many autistic people experience what are referred to as meltdowns or autistic meltdowns. Rather than trying to describe this myself, I've taken this from the website of the National Autistic Society. So from the National Autistic Society, it says, a meltdown is an intense response to an overwhelming situation. It happens when someone becomes completely overwhelmed by their current situation. They temporarily lose control of their behavior. This loss of control can be expressed verbally as shouting, screaming, or crying, or physically as in kicking, screaming, or biting. A meltdown is not the same thing as a temper tantrum. It is not naughty or bad behavior. It is when a person becomes so completely overwhelmed and their condition means it is difficult to express that in any other way, and so it is understandable that the result is a meltdown. Many autistic people show signs of distress before having a meltdown, which is sometimes referred to as the rumble stage, which I think is the bit that you put in an N64 controller to make it vibrate.
I was about to say exactly that.
They may start to exhibit signs of anxiety, such as pacing, seeking reassurance through repetitive questioning, or physical signs such as rocking backwards and forwards, or becoming very still. Meltdowns are not the only way that an autistic person may express feeling overwhelmed. They may also refuse to interact, withdraw from a situation they find challenging, or just avoid that situation altogether. Now, growing up, I always thought that I just had a nasty temper. But on reflection, actually, and it's the kind of reflection I've been doing a lot since having my diagnosis, but on reflection, I think it's more likely that those episodes were actually autistic meltdowns, just not something that I had recognized as such at the time. And those are things that I still struggle with today. I mean, these days I'm far more likely to shut down and withdraw than I am to start, shouting and screaming at things. But, it's still something that I struggle with. And again, in these first couple of weeks at work, I have had rumblings or full-on meltdowns almost every day at work. And of course, because pandemic, and also because the company I'm working for is a big global multinational and everyone works remotely on the software team anyway, it's not like there's been anyone around to see me having horrible big meltdowns at work, but they have been happening. And that's not something I'm accustomed to. I've spent the majority of my life very carefully managing my own circumstance to avoid being put into the situation where I might experience something like a meltdown. And looking back, I can only think of a very few occasions as an adult where I have felt this bad and this distressed. The first of those occasions was at university. So at school, I was a SWAT. I did my homework, I worked hard, I got good grades, I always turned up on time, I never had detention. I did get lines once, but frankly, I think that was a miscarriage of justice. I wasn't very popular at school, but I did have a handful of friends who I liked and I trusted. And then I went to university. And in my head, I thought university was just going to be another bigger school. But actually, even at undergraduate level, university doesn't have anything like the kind of structure that going to school has. Suddenly, I had no friends. I knew no one else on my course. There was no one I could talk to or ask about, what's this thing or what's that thing, or get understanding or clarification of things. I didn't enter the student union building the entire time I was there. I've been in the union building more since starting Merseyside Skeptics than I ever went when I was there, because I literally entered the union building 0 times in the entire time I was at university, because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't know, which door should I go in? What do I do when I'm there? What's my way around when I get in there? So I just didn't go. I just avoided going because I didn't know where I was supposed to. So I avoided the situation. I just didn't do it. I didn't have any sort of relationship with my tutors or my lecturers, partly because I didn't realize that you were meant to, because you don't have a relationship with your school teacher per se. You don't phone them up in between lessons and say, hey, what's this thing? In a way that you can with a university tutor. I sat on my own at the front of the lecture hall for every lecture, off to one side where I'd hoped I wouldn't be noticed. And I hated every second of doing it. Absolutely despised it. And I sat there and counted the minutes until I could leave the lecture hall. I just about muddled my way through my first year, but going back for the second year, I just couldn't handle it. I had lectures in new buildings that I didn't know where those buildings were. Other students would pick on me during labs because I would mutter lines from Doctor Who to myself to just, in what I recognize now is an attempt at self-soothing. It's trying to stave off a meltdown. But other people would overhear that and just take the piss out of me for it. Because of course they did, because they're students. That's how students work. Eventually, I just stopped going in. I just stopped going into university. I couldn't deal with the distress anymore. I couldn't deal with the anxiety anymore. So I just stopped going. About 4 weeks into my second year, I just packed in going. And what I did was I went to my GP. I went to talk to my GP and I talked to him about how hard I was struggling and how unhappy I was and how difficult I was finding things. And my GP diagnosed me with depression and put me on a course of Prozac. I don't think I was depressed. And even then, I don't think I was convinced I was depressed. But I accepted that because that's what my GP had said to me. And so I'd accepted, well, okay, well, I guess that's true. I didn't like the idea of being on antidepressants. That wasn't something that I wanted to do. And it became kind of a, all right, Mike, just fucking pull yourself together and get back into university and try and get the fuck on with it. So I picked myself back up again. And around the November, December time, I went back into university. And obviously I'd missed several weeks of lectures at this point. So I approached my lecturers, most of whom presented from overhead slides that were printed out on an OHP.
I was going to say OHP, come on.
I'm sure they're all on fucking PowerPoint these days, but back then it was OHPs and transparencies that they were presenting on.
You can't have been at university that long before I was for the things have changed so radically.
To be fair, I've had lectures given on. I had one lecturer who liked to give his lectures on OHPs, all of them. But he also typed up all the notes and put them online for us to get access to them afterwards. which now they all have to do. So now every lecture has to be recorded and has to be made available online for students, which is great from an accessibility perspective. But in the days when I was there, that was always kind of considered cheating to give people the notes, whereas we had one lecturer who gave us all of the notes online, and he was the same guy who did everything on OHPs.
So I went to my lecturers and I said, I've been off sick. I'm not well. Here's my doctor's note. I've missed several weeks. Is there any chance that I could get a copy of the course notes so I can, work over Christmas and try and pass my exams in January? And I was told, no, we can't do that. Because if you can't be bothered to turn up to my lectures, then I'm not prepared to give you any support. You go and fend for yourself. So I dutifully turned up to not everyone said that. Some people did give me the course notes. In fairness, some people did, but several lecturers just were like, well, no, if you're not going to turn up to my lectures, tough. So I turned up to my exams on a very cold January morning. I sat down, I wrote my name, I wrote the date, I read the questions through, and genuinely had no idea. Had not the faintest idea of what the questions were. I think it was a physics exam.
Wasn't your degree physics?
It was physics with computer science. It was like a joint major.
Because I thought it was just a degree in physics, and in which case, I mean, I could tell you it was a physics exam in that case.
So I read through the questions, and I did not have the foggiest. It was absolute nonsense to me. And from the school SWAT just 18 months earlier, 100% attendance, tried hard, A's and A stars coming out my eyeballs, and I'm looking at these exam questions without the faintest idea. So I wrote down on my exam paper, number 1, don't know. Number 2, don't know this one either. Number 3, I failed this, haven't I? Number 4, in fact, I'm just going home. And I left maybe 20 minutes into the exam. And I never went back to the university again.
And somehow you got 100%. Like, I fluked it.
I walked out of that exam room and I never went back to the university again. Not as a student, anyway. It's clear to me in hindsight that I was struggling at the time because I was autistic. Because all of the rules and the structure that I had known from school had disappeared. All of the ways that I might have been able to cope with the change in rules and structure through friends and relationships, they'd gone away too. And when I reached out for help in the only way that I knew how to reach out for help, by going to my GP, no help was forthcoming. I went to my lecturers, no help was forthcoming. I wasn't depressed. I was never fucking depressed. But my GP didn't recognize that at the time what I was struggling with was what he would have thought of as Asperger's syndrome. He didn't recognize that. And that's not all on him, obviously, because it was a different world 20-odd years ago. This was late 1998. Adult autism was still Rain Man, or that guy in Cube. You seen Cube? Horror film Cube? A load of people stuck in a cube.
Actually, I have seen Cube.
Yeah, and there's one of them's autistic, which in that, it just means he's Rain Man, but good at maths. And he sits in the corner and, rocks backwards and forwards until they need him to do maths. And then he's brilliant at maths, and he's doing prime factors in his head, and saves the day until they all get killed because horror film.
Gotcha.
But that's what autism was in 1998. Even so, Asperger's syndrome was in the ICD-10 from 1994 onwards. The ICD-10 being the World Health Organization version of the DSM. DSM's the American one, but in the UK we use the World Health Organization, which is the ICD. Asperger's syndrome was in the ICD-10 since at least 1994. But my GP didn't recognize that that's what I was actually struggling with, diagnosed me with depression. My lecturers didn't care that I was struggling, and so I dropped out of university. Forward a couple of years now to the year 2000. I'd got myself a job working at a software company based in Northampton.
Dealing with the Millennium Bug, obviously.
I moved to Northampton and I lived out of a bed and breakfast for a month until I was able to find a house. The B&B I stayed in was several miles from work, but I chose that one because I could book it online, which was a novelty even in 2000. It was, that was still a novelty to do, but it meant I didn't have to call somebody up to make the booking. So that was the bed and breakfast that I stayed in. It was a long way from the office. I couldn't drive. It was a 90-minute walk into work and back again every day. One of the first tasks I was given at work was to try and figure out a way to translate a verbal description of what a jockey was wearing So red and white stripes with red sleeves and star on cap or something along those lines. Try and translate that into a picture of the jockey's outfit. And I couldn't do it. I worked on it for days. I got absolutely nowhere. Again, panicking. Again, imposter syndrome. Thinking that they were going to realize, we hired the wrong guy here. This guy's an idiot. He shouldn't be here. I overlabored what I was doing. I deliberately overlabored it. I would draw out tasks that would take a couple of hours to make them take a couple of days, just so that I could be seen to be busy and people wouldn't think, what the hell's this guy doing? Eventually, one of the senior developers, a guy called Mark, recognized that I was struggling, and he took the problem off me and did it himself. And I could have taken that really badly. But actually, when Mark came back to me later, he said that he'd found it really difficult as well. So actually, it turns out this was a really hard problem. And he invited me to look through the solution he'd come up with and to understand the solution that he'd come up with, which I did. And that very much helped calm me down in a situation where, again, I was feeling overwhelmed and scared, and I kind of wanted nothing more than to just run away from it. Like I'd done at university, that's just run away from the situation, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. It was that same intolerable dread, that same anxiety, that same helplessness that I'd felt at university, and I was feeling it again. I was lucky at the time that what happened after I'd only been there a few weeks, there was some big corporate shenanigans that aren't worth really going into, but suddenly the entire software team was up and moved to a different company. And so suddenly all of us were doing something new. None of us knew what was going on. And that meant the leadership within the company was giving some very specific guidelines, very specific structure, telling us exactly what we needed to do. And that was exactly what I needed to be able to get through the first few weeks in the job and be able to settle into that job. And so I didn't leave that job for the next 21 years. With one very brief exception. 2004. I'd been living in Northampton for 4 years. I'd been commuting to Merseyside every, a couple of times a month, probably. I was going back up to Merseyside to see friends and family. As I say, I'd been there for 4 years. I'd made no friends in Northampton. Literally zero. Everyone I knew lived in Merseyside.
I think that's quite typical of Northampton, though, to be fair. I don't think that's a you thing.
What annoys me, in hindsight, is Matt Smith, who played the Doctor, lived in Northampton at the time I lived in Northampton. It's like,
you might as well have known him.
Fuck.
I thought you were going to say what annoyed me in hindsight was that Northampton was so far away from Southampton. Have some fucking consistency.
and why is Hampton not in the middle?
Exactly. That
not exactly in between them.
Unbelievable.
So I'd made no friends. Everyone that I knew was on Merseyside. So I was commuting up, most weekends to be able to see, just to have some social time with people, So I was very, very lonely. I was very, very unhappy. I had a falling out with my boss, who I didn't think was listening to me. And so I decided it was time to leave. So I started applying for jobs back in the Northwest, and I got a job in Warrington, which was close enough to Wallasey, where I'd grown up, for me to be able to move back to Wallasey, where my friends and family were. And so that's what I did. Even though that meant a 45-minute commute down the M56 every morning, I moved back to Wallasey. And again, I found myself in that very familiar place of distress and anxiety. I was working on a new product. I was working on a new code base that I didn't know very well. I had no relationships with anyone else in the company. There was no one else I could talk to or ask for help. I was struggling with imposter syndrome again, and I had very unclear direction from my manager. There was a large car park on site at the office park where I was working, and you had to pay to use it. But I didn't know where to pay or how to pay. So I parked on the street and walked into work instead. Until somebody got annoyed with me that I kept parking outside their house and came out and shouted at me in the street when I was coming home from work one day. On my first day on the job, one of the other developers decided that he was going to take me for lunch, which I thought was kind of him. So he took me down to the canteen in the business centre that we were in. And over lunch, he decided to tell me about the reason that you see Indian people working as doctors in the NHS and why you always see Indian people living on the same street. Because it's part of their grand plan. They work hard to get well-paid jobs and live a relatively meager existence outside of work because they're sending the bulk of their salary back to relatives in India. And then once there's enough of them in the health service, he told me, they're going to quit en masse and return to the fortune that they've saved up there for the last 20 years and then watch the NHS collapse without them, a plan that has been conceived by the Indian people as revenge for the British invasion and colonization of India in the 19th century.
Wow.
Jesus.
Now, Indian people getting medical degrees and working as doctors is part of their grand plan, but that's the end of their personal grand plan, is like, I'm going to just get a good job. So you don't need the rest of it. It's like their individual grand plans for how to get ahead in their personal lives.
So I never had lunch again. The entire time I was in that job, I didn't have lunch because I didn't want to have to engage with this person and his fucking racist bullshit.
I mean, that's very reasonable. That is a totally normal response to that.
So I had, again, the same anxiety, the same isolation, the same feelings of imposter syndrome, that distress, that uncertainty, just like university, just like when I started at my job in Northampton. And then I had a phone call from my old job saying, the boss you didn't get on with has left. Do you want to come back? And so I jumped at the chance. The comfort of going back to a product that I knew, to a team that I knew, to a code base I was largely responsible for, one where I knew where I stood, one where I knew how to proceed. Of course I went back. I'd only been away for 3 months. But going back was so much easier than facing up to and dealing with how I was feeling in my new job, racist co-workers and all. And so that's where I stayed. That's where I stayed until the start of this year, having never really learned how to deal with that upheaval, having never learned how to deal with those big disruptive changes. And every time it feels the same. Every time I struggle to cope and function on a day-to-day basis. And every time I've either run away or I've been lucky enough to have the problem solved for me. I'm 42 years old and I've never learned to cope with that. Instead, I've studiously stage managed my entire career so that I didn't have to learn how to cope with that. And to ensure that the environment I was operating in was one that I knew I would be able to function in. But I don't have that luxury anymore. The first weeks at my new job have been outrageously difficult. As I say, imposter syndrome looming large. What's expected of me has been very unclear. My work has been very unstructured. Some of my new colleagues have reacted very negatively to me joining the team, all of which has induced a paralyzing anxiety where I am terrified of letting people down. Some people like to talk about autistic superpowers. Things like, where autistic people find things easy where neurotypical people might struggle with. And sure, it's fun that I know pi to 35 decimal places and I can recite, great swathes of episodes of Doctor Who.
I mean, that's not that fun.
It's terrific fun. Trust me. But feeling like this is just so fucking horrible. It's really, really unpleasant. Now, the difference this time is that now I know that I'm autistic and I can name why I'm struggling and I can recognize how it affects me. I'm not just shit. I'm not just crap at being a human being. I'm an autistic man trying to exist in an environment that really wasn't designed for me. So when my managers have reached out to me and asked how things are going, I've been able to name it. I've been able to say, I don't know if you knew this, but actually I'm autistic. And that means I'm going to find some things hard that other folks are going to find very easy. And I've been lucky that their response to that has been so far, we didn't know that, but now we do. You'll get every support from us. And that's really meant a lot to me. And I hope that support is going to be forthcoming when I need it. It also means that I've been able for the first time to recognize and identify a pattern of behavior in myself, to recognize how much I struggle when I have those big upheavals in my life. What had previously I had assumed been 3 completely independent instances of, what happened to me at university, what happened to me in Northampton, what happened to me in Warrington, and what's happening to me now. Actually, they're all the same thing. It's all the same, that same debilitating and agonizing inability to cope with wholesale change, especially for some reason within my career. But now I know that that's a problem. The next step is for me to go out and try and find somebody to help me solve it. So that if and when this happens again, I never need to feel like this again.
Often on this show, I talk about things targeted specifically at women. Sometimes those things seem silly and light, like the jade egg sold by Gwyneth Paltrow at Goop.
I don't think they were too light. I thought they had a decent weight to them.
They were quite weighty. Didn't we buy one?
We bought a fake one.
Yeah.
We didn't buy one from Goop. We bought a fake one for the use in a QED video. And I don't know where it is. I might have it.
Who's got it? I think you've got it.
No, you've got it. You got it.
I haven't got it. I bought myself one, a little mini one, for my talk that I give on this sort of stuff. But you've got one. You don't need one. I'll have it.
I don't know that I've got it.
I think you've got it.
It's possible that I've got it.
I don't know who else would have it.
Dave might have kept it. You don't know. He might have smuggled it out somehow.
Oh, you know how.
I could do with that for my talk. Sometimes they seem silly and light, like the jade eggs, but then we talk about some of the potential dangers involved in these seemingly light, innocuous items, and they don't seem quite so silly.
I saw a thing on my Twitter today, which was literally just a headline, and it was something like, Gwyneth Paltrow has broken down over lockdown and eaten some bread.
Oh my God.
It was just, oh, for fuck's sake.
I saw a news article the other day saying that she drank alcohol every day during lockdown.
Right.
Not news.
It's newsworthy.
Yeah.
Woman drinks wine.
And no bread.
Yeah.
Well, no, wine and bread. Ooh.
Wine and bread.
She turned Catholic. That's over lockdown. Gwyneth Paltrow's gone Catholic.
We've talked about things like the truly damaging herbal pellets that, when placed inside the vagina for days at a time, remove chunks of skin from the vaginal walls. We've talked about crystal dildos and magic vibrators, and how the women's wellness industry pitches themselves as promoting female empowerment. Gwyneth Paltrow herself says as much. In an interview for the New York Times in 2018, she said, "We want to always be moving culture forward with what we do in the content and in the offerings, and also create conversations and forums to help eliminate shame. I think a lot of women experience a lot of shame in their lives. The more we talk about things that are sometimes uncomfortable, that are sometimes unknown, it might resonate with somebody, and then we might help them shed a little bit of that feeling." There's this perception that women's wellness is about empowering women. It's about strength and femininity. It's about giving women confidence and answers. It's about giving women control over how they are perceived. And we also know that modern society puts a pressure on women to be everything, to be aesthetically pleasing and financially successful, to work long hours and also put our families first, to keep our homes spotless and our bodies perfect, and to have amazing sex, but not too often or too visibly, because then we're sluts. You're expected to be twice as good as men to get half as far in life, and you mustn't complain about it because then you're a bore. That's not to say there isn't an awful lot of pressure on men too. Generally, things are pretty bad for most people. Most working people are working long hours. I mean, it's true, isn't it? Most people are working long hours with little space to switch off and enjoy themselves. How many people are exhausted by the end of the day because they're putting all their time into work? And if they want to actually socialize, that's coming out of limited time and space that they have. I have to give myself, and I know I have a disability, so it's slightly different for me, but I have to give myself a few evenings off a week, but also feel like I can't give myself a few evenings off a week because I've got so much other stuff to be getting done. There is a pressure on what you need to get done. It's why people save up all their chores for the weekend and then lose their entire weekend doing chores. Like, there is an enormous pressure on people to be busy all the time in a way that didn't used to be the case. You used to get home from work at 5:30 and switch off for the rest of the evening.
I think some people still do that, but there's a bunch of people who are doing other things that don't do that switch off at 5:30. I mean, here we are at 10 to 8 recording a podcast.
Yeah, and we have the luxury that we can choose to add lots of additional things to our lives, but then there's people who go off and work a second job when they get home of an evening.
Yeah.
So it's, for a large swathes of the population, you're busy all the time, and there's a lot of pressure to be that all the time.
Yeah, I'm basically non-stop constantly.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter what is going on, and I feel guilty if I'm sitting there with nothing to do.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I'm wasting my time. I'm letting people down. It's like, there's something I could be doing now. Why am I just sitting on the couch? And so I will go up, and even if it's just, I'm going to go and, you know, I'll go and learn some new software. I'm going to go write a website. I'm going to just something, just so I've got some activity going on. because it's massively uncomfortable to not be busy.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know whether that's a normal thing or whether the three of us are not very good advocates for what is a normal thing. Because I work on a near constant basis on a million different projects and then drop things because I'm trying to take on too many of them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is doing that. I think a lot of people still do switch off.
I think some people still do switch off. I think a lot of people don't. A lot of people feel like they have to be busy working all the time. And if they're not, like, especially if you've got kids that you get home from work and you immediately have to do all the things you have to do.
If you've got kids, I mean, obviously kids are another job on top of it. Just don't have kids. If everybody just doesn't have kids, this problem will go away in a couple of generations.
And you see it even wider, that we then only value people who are contributing work. We don't always define what we mean by work, and we often mean specifically paid work. So then we don't value unpaid labour that people are doing, and we don't value people who aren't able to contribute to work that pays them, and then end up thinking that our welfare system is shit because we're looking after people who can't work, and it drives me crazy. That's a completely separate rant to this. But it's an all-encompassing problem, and basically I hate capitalism.
We get accused of being increasingly left-wing. Although, in fairness, the people, there was somebody I saw someone just the other week saying they stopped listening because we got too woke and left-wing. It's like you were listening to a podcast of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. At what point did you think we were not going to be fairly left-wing anyway? We're all from the Merseyside area. This is not exactly a hotbed of rampant capitalism.
I did legitimately write a tweet the other day that started off with "not to defend Hitler, but," and then I thought, no, leave it. Let's not. Let's just leave that alone. I don't need to write that. I don't need to write that. It may be a bit right wing.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people out there already defending Hitler without you pitching into London.
We know that mental health issues have been on the rise, but we're also talking more about mental health issues than ever before, which means that people are looking for answers. We're in this world where there has to be a fix for everything. If you're depressed, if your mental health is poor, it's your fault and you need to find the answer so that you can contribute more to the economy. And where the wellness world excels is its ability to give definitive answers. Sure, they're mostly wrong answers, but that doesn't matter nearly as much as there being definitive answers, something that you can put your time, energy and money into to try and achieve the goal that you're working towards, whatever that goal is. And where women's wellness excels is in its perceived gentle nature. We tend not to challenge things targeted at women because we don't see them as important. Our society is set up to undermine the experiences that women have, consciously or unconsciously, so that even we as skeptics are slow to challenge women's wellness, or we can be guilty of only using it as an example of something silly and ridiculous. We're sometimes slow to see the wider harm.
I think that's true. I think it's also the case that the people who are pushing a lot of women's wellness bullshit have been incredibly successful in tying it to a level of empowerment.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
That it then can feel not necessarily intuitive to start picking at that without coming across like you're just trying to disempower women. So I think they've been successful in that marketing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the two things come together in this kind of perfect storm. We've got a society that is set up to see things that affect women as light and fluffy and not important, but also it's hard to challenge things that's pitching itself as empowering women when we would all align with a priority to empower women in our society. Over the last few months, I've been peripherally aware of marketing from the Institute of OM. I brushed it off as largely related to yoga, because OM, and another example of some slick woo that wasn't particularly interesting, so I never really looked into it. I couldn't even tell you where I saw the marketing, probably Instagram, but I recognise the logo. I know I've seen stuff from them and noticed it as the Institute of OM, but I've not thought anything of it. I recognise the logo. It's a slick white background with clean black lines spelling out the words, the Institute of OM. But it was only when I listened to a podcast called The Orgasm Cult from BBC Radio 4 that I realised there was something more interesting about them. So the Orgasm Cult focuses on another business, a business called OneTaste, founded by a woman called Nicole Daydone. It was founded in 2004 and started out in San Francisco. And members of OneTaste suggest that people working in tech companies were a big audience for the practice. And then in 2009, the company really kicked off after an article in the New York Times covered them. And on paper, OneTaste was about education. They produced media and workshops. They held weekend retreats and training sessions to become OneTaste practitioners. And they were generally just teaching about a practice called Orgasmic Meditation. In a TEDx talk on OneTaste, Nicole Daedone claimed, "It will be turned on women and those who dare to stroke us who actually change the world by feeding this desire for connection that we all have." Now, to be clear here, when she's talking about women, she specifically means women who have vaginas and clitorises? Clitori? What's the plural of clitoris?
Clitoropodies.
Yes, I think that's it.
I'm not sure what the plural is, but specifically those are the women she's talking about, because orgasmic meditation is specifically centered around clitoral stimulation. And from the TEDx talk, it seems like OneTaste is pretty much your bog standard women's wellness company, claiming to fix all your ills by doing this one simple thing and empowering women in the process.
And the one simple thing that they're doing is the clitoris.
Is wanking, yeah, basically. Yeah. But it turns out there's more to it than that. So OneTaste are currently under investigation by the FBI. There are allegations of sex trafficking, prostitution, and violation of labour laws. An expose in Bloomberg in 2018 explained that some OneTaste members lived in communal houses, which were colloquially known as OM houses, where members shared beds with other members and took part in several hours of OM practice each day. And when they weren't OMing, members would contact people who attended OneTaste events with the hope of selling them tickets for different stages of different classes.
So it's a multi-level marketing scheme with wanking.
Yes.
You lie in bed with a load of people, wank for several hours, and then try and sell them on a multi-level marketing ticket.
Pretty much, yes. So these OneTaste events, or OM circles, were evening events where 30 plus pairs of people would partake in OM practices together. And I will talk about what an OM practice looks like towards the end of this piece, but it's not specifically relevant right now. So women would lay on nests of cushions with men perched in front of them, wearing gloves and stroking them. The courses themselves weren't cheap. So in the 2018, the Bloomberg article said, currently students pay $499 for a weekend course, $4,000 for a retreat, $12,000 for the coaching program, and $16,000 for an intensive. And in 2014, they launched an annual subscription costing $60,000, which allowed customers to take as many courses as they wanted and sit in the front row for each of them for the entire year.
That's an expensive wank, in it. That is very expensive.
Very expensive. So for reference, that's between £350,000 and £11,000 for courses using today's conversion rates, because I was being lazy, and over £40,000 for the annual subscription. A member quoted in the Bloomberg article spent over $150,000 with her husband paying for courses.
Jesus.
It's seriously expensive.
Also, she had $150,000 to be able to spend on it as well.
No, we'll come to that.
Right.
So many ex-members of OneTaste have spoken to say that they were working for OneTaste, but they were also often working either for free or for very low pay in order to show their dedication to the cause. And if they asked essentially why they weren't being paid, they would be criticised for asking that question and told that they were too worried about the money.
That's always a good sign. That's always a good sign when you're working anywhere and when you ask to get paid, they tell you you're too focused on the money.
While still paying for access to their own courses or training, as well as bringing in new members or customers. So we have a group where some members have described living in a house altogether, employed by a company who are barely paying them, while also paying large sums of money for courses, getting deeper and deeper into the practice, oming several hours a day, as well as working. Members were also expected to participate in very busy OneTaste group chats on their phones with 100 texts per hour, which sounds very familiar if you've heard of the Nexium cult. They did making sure people were engaged in text chats regularly as well. Members were encouraged to get into debt in order to pay for courses. So one former employee said that she was told to sign up for a credit card in front of the person making the sales pitch in order to buy a course. And if they couldn't find a way to pay, they were encouraged to ask other members to pay for their courses for them, sometimes with the implication that in return they would have sex. At the events, there were games that were used to get private details about attendees that could later be used to sell courses to them. And some employees would say that they were told to dress in particular clothing to entice customers. There's been reports that there were goals to target particularly attractive women and particularly rich men, basically, to bring them into this practice.
The two classic groups that you want in your cult, essentially, to get more people into your cult.
Employees were also encouraged to use sex to help encourage customers to pay for more courses. There are reports of staffers at OneTaste either consciously or unconsciously using abusive manipulation techniques to encourage further sales, essentially love bombing members when they spent money on courses and freezing them out when they didn't. And then there are also some reports of some deeply distressing and damaging practices encouraged by OneTaste, which I'm not going to go into detail on here because it's not necessary for this particular discussion, but you can read the Bloomberg article or listen to the Orgasm Cult for more details. Safe to say the practice was used to absolve, justify, or encourage abuse and more. And it's really difficult listening. Like, there's a particular episode in the podcast that is particularly challenging listening for that reason. By the end of its life, OneTaste was offering courses that were particularly exclusive called Magic School. And some members were named priests and priestesses of orgasm. The Bloomberg article describes them. The new clergy, dressed in white, conducted a group Om overseen by Daydone in front of the 100 or so attendees. It was a religion, a former employee says. Orgasm was God and Nicole was like Jesus or Muhammad. So in 2016, OneTaste stopped hosting Om Circle events. And at one point, the Om houses were fully closed. And in 2018, the company ceased trading entirely. As I said before, they're under investigation by the FBI. And Nicole Daydone has disappeared. But according to The Telegraph, a former owner and former CEO, that's two separate people, of OneTaste are now listed as the CEO and director of Reach at the Institute of Om. The Institute also references a lot of material from Nicole Daydone and is promoting research that began under OneTaste, which I will talk about in a future episode. That's not to say that the Institute of Om has anything to do with any of those past practices. And from what I can gather from their website, they aren't selling anything. But it is people who have been involved in OneTaste and now running this entirely separate institute.
Yeah.
Which is slightly concerning. And still promoting oming this practice of orgasmic meditation. But if you sign up by email, which I have, you get a 70-page document describing the practice of Om, which includes an audio-guided Om practice.
It's a 70-page document on how to wank.
Yes. So there's a lot in it. I'm going to end this piece by telling you some of the details of the step-by-step how to Om, which is a 15-step.
You're going to give the listeners instructions on how to wank?
Yeah. But just to, I'm just going to scroll back up to the beginning.
Is this a way of us trying to encourage more Patreon subscribers? And are we like slowly turning into an OnlyFans account? Is that what's happening?
So it's an entire like training document. They have a section on philosophy and principles, a section on the technique, a section on the practice, which apparently two separate things, and a section on resources. They've got loads of testimonials throughout the whole thing. The first one is from a doctor, health coach, and single mom who lives in the Bay Area. Very long testimonial, in fact. Blimey. And then, yeah, they go into like, there's 4 courses. Course 1 is on philosophy and principles. Lesson 1 is on tumescence.
Right.
There's likely a problem in your life that you unknowingly face every day. It's as pervasive as stress and as invisible as carbon monoxide. It's a leading cause of agitation, procrastination, sexual dysfunction, feelings of reactivity, and compulsive behavior, just to name a few. These experiences are a sign of tumescence, a state of accumulated blockage from moments when, for one reason or another, the desire to connect or express went unfulfilled. That's what tumescence means, Marsh.
So they're essentially the lady version of blue balls, is essentially what they describe. You've stored up your missed opportunities.
Well, no, because it's not even that really that they're saying. They're basically saying, like, here are all common things that you would experience, common feelings that you would experience, and we're attributing it to that. Whereas people who are talking about feeling blue balls, they've got the horniness first, and then they're claiming that...
Oh, okay, so maybe I misunderstood. I thought they were saying that all those things happened because at some point you were horny and didn't come.
No.
Okay.
No. Nothing to do with that. This is just like, in your normal life, you're existing as a normal human, you're not thinking about sex at all, and then suddenly you feel all these things, and that's related to your lack of orgasmic meditation.
Yeah, they can't bring the sex in too early, Marsh. They'll scare people away. So they've got to ease you in gently, like a Paul McKenna book with a CD on the cover and everything.
I can make you come, Paul McKenna. No, but I'm pretty certain the idea that they can't bring the sex in too early, I think that's the complete opposite of their entire business model by the sounds of things. It's that they put the sex up front as a way of getting people into what is otherwise a financially transactional cult, is what it sounds like.
So then they move into lesson 2, which tells you what OM is, which I'm going to tell you about the specific step-by-step guide in a second, so we'll not focus on that. Then there's some stuff on the science, which I'm going to save for a future episode. Lesson 4 is orgasm redefined. So they have this idea that orgasm isn't climax. So if you do orgasm meditation, you're supposed to not have a goal of climax, which, good practice for sex in general, but they also say that orgasmic meditation is not sex. So it is just stroking for stroking's sake, essentially.
And it's a 70-page document saying that.
So they have this what they claim is a new definition for what orgasm is and the orgasm state, which is quite convenient because then at other points they describe experiences of people using this practice who've been able to have 3-hour-long orgasms, which if you've decided orgasm isn't about climax and you're defining the terms of orgasm, then of course you can say an orgasm lasts for 3 hours.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a hell of a bait and switch, innit? To be like, come and join our orgasm cult. You'll be orgasming all the time. By the way, when we say orgasm...
Yeah, what they've done there is a masturbate and switch.
There's more lessons. So they have what they call the container. The practice of OM is safe, reliable, and repeatable because it takes place within an established container. So they say OM is always 15 minutes, always occurs within the same sequence of steps. It is entirely non-reciprocal. Both roles in OM are done solely for their own enjoyment, not for any additional benefit or expectation of compensation. The stroker remains fully clothed and the strokee only undresses from the waist down. Nothing extra in the nest, i.e. no romantic gestures, added or subtracted, steps, changes to the time limit, etc. Like it always goes exactly the same way. I mean, it'd be great for you, Mike, because it's like fully structured routine.
Alice, have you joined this cult and are you trying to get Mike into it? Is that what this is now?
Then they have a lesson on the spot, which is, so oming, not only is it always 15 minutes, it doesn't require climax, it's always in this particular way. They also have this very specific spot. So you have to rub the clitoris exactly at the 1 o'clock spot.
Like your 1 o'clock or their 1 o'clock?
The 1 o'clock if you're looking at the woman.
That's a weird thing. That it's weird that that's the answer to that. Surely, because if this is all about the stroke E, essentially, you'd imagine it would be the 11 o'clock spot. 1 o'clock if you're the one doing the looking.
So they would say it's on it's on the woman's left.
It also makes me wonder what happens if you're left-handed. Does it switch sides if your dominant hand is on the other side?
No, it's always on the left.
Do they justify why it's always at the 1 o'clock spot?
Well, some people are left-handed, some people are right-handed, but nobody is right-clitted.
Yeah, it's like how all polar bears are left pawed. It's the same but for clitorises.
There's a big, long, several paragraph section that explains the spots, but I'm not sure that it really explains why it's always the left side. It says things about perhaps when you're cooking your dinner and you find the spot by adding just the right amount of salt, it's the perfect level of seasoning. Then the salt shaker top falls off and 5 times as much salt pours into the dish. Now we're probably way off the spot. And then they talk about musical instruments and finding the balance of pressure and positioning.
This all just sounds like this one lady.
It's woo. It's all just woo.
It's woo, but it sounds specific like this one lady wanted people to pay her to rub her clitoris. And so she designed
where she likes
exactly
it.
just to her own personal taste.
In Ohm, the spot is a location on the clitoris that you can feel. For a stroker, it feels like a light zing at the tip of the stroking finger. For the strokee, it's a similar unmistakable feeling. So if you as a person are stroking the clitoris of a woman, you can feel when you've hit the spot because you get a zing in your finger.
Especially if you've been walking on nylon carpet, innit?
It's very bizarre. Then they have a lesson on the difference between Ohm and sex, mind training, goallessness, Ohm as a practice. And, you know, things like goallessness during sex is great. Some of these things may well be helpful, healthy things for people to learn, especially if they are having sex in a way that is just what society tells them sex should be.
Yeah, it's all good stuff to learn, but not necessarily when you're paying £15,000 in order to be told just stroke that exact spot for everybody.
Well, to be fair, I've got this guide for free. So
that's true.
Cost me nothing.
Yeah, in many ways, you've mugged them off.
Is that what we're calling it now?
And then we get to the technique. So they specifically say that that ohming is a partnered practice, so it has to involve two people. But the way it was done through OneTaste is that you would just ask somebody if they wanted to ohm with you. It wasn't a relationship thing. It was you might go to a class and ohm with somebody you've never met before. And that was completely normal as part of that practice. But they say that it is specifically partnered. It has to be between two people.
You can't just lean on one hand till it goes dead and then...
So what they say is the main reason is connection. Everything about ohm relates back to connection. Even the act of asking for an ohm brings you out of your own world into connection with someone else's. And then they say, in the same way that you can't tickle yourself, you can't take yourself out of control. So it has to be between two partners, basically.
The idea that it could just be anybody just reminds me, because obviously this seems very clearly culty in lots of ways. It seems to have a lot of very cult-like attributes to it. And one of the things that is, if not necessarily definitional, and certainly indicative aspects of a cult is the attempts to destabilize interpersonal solid relationships. Because it's something Scientology do. If you're in the Sea Org and you fall in love with someone in the Sea Org, they deliberately try and break that bond. They try and get children away from mothers. Because once you have a strong, well-founded personal relationship going on, then it's much easier for the two of you together to look around and say, hang on, this is bullshit. Hang on, this is weird. You've got something that matters to you more than the cult. And so cults will try and destabilize that. And it sounds like there's an element of that there. If this is just saying that it's that personal connection with just anybody and therefore not necessarily in a strictly relationship kind of way.
So interestingly, they didn't necessarily discourage relationships between people inside OneTaste. And in fact, one of the people who has left and has talked publicly about her experience inside of OneTaste met her husband in OneTaste and was married at a retreat, a OneTaste 2-week retreat. And they were also encouraged to have relationships basically where the man was paying for all the courses of the woman and they were essentially in a relationship for the period of time that agreement was in place. But they went through phases of promoting, but you would still own with strangers and different people and you would still be building these connections with lots of different people, and that they didn't encourage monogamy. Interestingly, in the podcast, there does come a point where they talk about that Nicole Daedone does then shift towards supporting monogamy when she meets Bella, basically. But yeah, it's not quite as clear cut as you're not allowed those relationships. But actually, in a way, the cults are right, because the woman who left, she left with her husband partly because she'd got to a point where this is challenging now to maintain. So they give you instructions on how to find a partner to ohm with you. And I think, so there's even questions. So lesson 3, steps of the ohm. You have to start
on Tinder.
So it says, in this lesson, we will explain the sequence of the steps of Om from start to finish. Some of the steps will be covered in detail in other lessons, so you don't need to remember everything. The steps are always done in this order. Step 1, ask for an Om. The Om starts with either partner asking for an Om. Simply ask your partner, would you like to Om? Yes or no are both always acceptable answers. If you're Oming right away, you proceed to set up the nest. If you're Oming at a later time, make sure to schedule it so both of you are clear when and where it will be. Step 2, set up the nest. They have detailed instructions on how to do this in one of the appendices. Appendices?
Appendopedies.
They say, once you're ready to Om, you set up the nest. Make sure you have a blanket and yoga mat, at least 3 pillows, a firm cushion, lubricant, a hand towel, a pair of thin vinyl, latex or nitrile gloves, and a timer. Step 3, get into position. Once the nest is set up, the strokee removes their clothes from the waist down, lies down in the nest and butterflies their legs open. The stroker remains fully clothed and gets into position, sitting to the strokee's right. The stroker has their left leg over the strokee's body, and the strokee brings their right leg to rest over the stroker's right thigh. Step 4, the first safe port of the Om. Once both partners are comfortably in position, the stroker safe ports the strokee that they are about to apply grounding pressure by saying, I'm going to touch your thighs now. They then put their hands on the middle of the strokee's thighs, applying medium pressure. Step 5, the noticing step. While keeping their hands still on their partner's thighs, the stroker places their attention on their partner's genitals and describes 1 to 3 things they see in terms of shape, colour, location and texture using simple, value-neutral language.
That's an odd step, because if you're going to do this a lot of times, are you just going to get used to just saying the same thing every time? Or do you have to come up with something new every time? Because that's
a lot of pressure.
Well, I guess you have to notice something specific to that time.
Well, yeah. But if you're regularly oming, as they recommend you do, you're going to either just sound like you're going through the motions of noticing the same thing again, or you're going to start really running out. Like, what you need to do is pace yourself early on and don't go too general. Go super specific early doors.
Maybe it's about how you combine the things as well, though. Like, maybe this time they look this particular way, but combined with this particular texture.
You're going to start still running out, you'd imagine.
Different combinations of things. Step 6, prepare to stroke. The stroker puts on their gloves. They apply lube to their left index finger and right thumb. Step 7, the second safe port. The stroker safe ports their partner before touching them by saying, I'm going to touch your genitals now. The stroker starts the 15-minute timer with an interval bell at 13 minutes. Step 8, the lube stroke. Using the middle and ring fingers of each hand, gently part the outer labia and slowly glide the left index finger from the base of the introitus between the parted labia to the clitoris. Bring the left thumb to rest just above the hood, pulling it back to expose the clitoris. The right thumb is placed at the base of the introitus, resting without applying pressure or penetrating beyond the right thumbnail. Step 9, stroking. Now you will begin stroking. Begin with a simple light pressure, slow stroke, up, down, up, down. Remember to brush, not rub. Step 10, offers and requests. Offers and requests refer to the communication used by either partner during an Om in order to help adjust the stroke to be more sensational. Offers and requests are specific and actionable, related to the speed, pressure, length, and location of the stroke. For example, if the strokee would like less pressure in the stroke, they would ask, can I have a lighter stroke? Then the stroker would simply adjust the stroke accordingly. If the stroker intuitively sensed that a faster stroke might be more on the spot, they might ask, would you like a faster stroke? Language that doesn't provide specific feedback, such as, does that feel good? Or can I have a different stroke? Should be omitted. It's very prescriptive, which is why I wanted to read it out specifically, because it's interesting in how prescriptive it is. Step 11, the 2-minute mark. After 13 minutes, the stroker says 2 minutes out loud at a volume level the strokee can hear. The stroker then shifts to mainly downstrokes for the duration of the Om. Step 12, it gets really fun now. The second grounding. After 15 minutes, the stroker says time and stops stroking. Then the stroker places their hands flat on the strokee's genitals, left hand first with fingers pointed downward, then right hand on top of the left with fingers pointed upward, and applies heavy sustained pressure for 10 to 15 seconds up towards the strokee's head and or down towards their pubic bone. Step 13, the towel stroke. There's even instructions on how to remove the lube. After the grounding pressure, the stroker does the towel stroke. They remove the towel from under the strokey, fold it in half, and with medium pressure, gently wipe lube from the strokee's genitals using just one smooth motion while avoiding the anus and the clitoris. Or as they've written, clitoris. Typo there. They fold the towel so the lube is on the inside and place it gently over the strokee's genitals. Then they remove their gloves and help the strokey sit up. Step 14, share frames. Once the strokey sits up, each partner shares a frame. This is one moment from the OM when they felt a sensation in their bodies. They describe it in simple, value-neutral language. And after each frame, the other person simply responds with, thank you. Step 15, put away the nest. After the frames are complete, they stand up and move out of the nest. The strokey gets fully dressed and both people put the nest supplies away. Once the space is clean, the OM is now complete.
It's funny, isn't it? And it's described so clinically, you know?
Which is why I didn't mind, you know, which is why I think it's useful to read out fully on air, because, like, I'm not, if it was less clinical, I would have probably paraphrased. Yeah. But with it being so clinical, it is quite, but that obviously makes it easy for them to draw people in, because people are going into a room with a load of strangers for an own practice. You've got to find a way to make it comfortable for them to expose their genitals to a stranger and have that stranger touch them when they don't know them. And the way to do that is to make it completely clinical step by step.
Well, I mean, that's true. That's sort of saying it as if the end goal is something laudable or important, when actually what we're talking about is a sex cult.
Yeah.
That people are essentially convincing people to hand over money by telling them that what you're going to be doing is something absolutely revelatory, when it's nothing of the sort.
The thing is, it makes me wonder, like, how much the founder believed it, because I don't think she set out to create a cult. I'm sure there are cult leaders who don't set out to create a cult, but it comes out of the Lafayette Morehouse cult, which was a sex commune in the 60s. And they were basically doing this practice. And then Nicole Daedone was taught by somebody who'd been part of this cult, either was part of it or was vaguely affiliated with it or had learned the practice through them. And it's kind of all connected. It kind of daisy chains down.
Yeah, but it's difficult to know whether, you know, it's obviously always difficult to know whether anybody actually believes it or doesn't believe it. But it's easy to see a version in which she was told about this practice that was the basis of a sex commune, and then used that as a way of building a very financially successful, system beneath her.
Yeah. And you watch the TED Talk, and she talks very passionately about how she just wants to give this to everybody. She experienced it for the first time, and she wanted to learn. The phrasing she uses is very peculiar. She says something like she wanted to understand how she could live in this world, and then she wanted to share it with other people. And she spent a long time learning about it before she set up the business. But if that's true, then you don't charge people quite so much.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of money. It's a multi-level marketing. I mean, obviously there's a fucking TED Talk on it. It all sounds...
TEDx.
Well, yeah, obviously not only is it a TED Talk, it's a TEDx talk. It all sounds like incredibly exploitative.
Yeah, incredibly so. But obviously now under investigation by the FBI.
So QED, it's that time of year again. It comes around faster every time, doesn't it? where we get to talk about QED. But we have announced some details of the next QED. Marsh?
Yes, we have dates for the next QED. So we're going to be taking place in February 4th to 6th, 2022. We were going to be doing it in October 2021, but this whole pandemic thing, nobody wants to buy a ticket now, knowing for absolute certain there's going to be an event in October that's definitely going to happen and not get pandemicked away. So we feel pretty confident that February is a date that we can run with. And so we'll be hosting the next QED then. So we expect to see all of you there. We expect to see 3 years worth of QEDs in that one hotel, which will be the same hotel as always, the Manchester Piccadilly Mercure. And we expect you all to be there, and more details will be announced on our website in the coming weeks and months and on this show as well.
Yeah, we got people writing in saying how much the ticket's going to be, when the ticket's going to be on. So all this stuff we don't know yet, because it's still very much, until very recently, it was, can we even do one? Can we even do a QED? And now we're at the point now where we're pretty sure we can, which is why we've started going out and we've announced dates. We wanted to get the dates out there for people as quickly as possible.
And we've signed a contract with the venue, so that's the level of confidence we have.
But yeah, so thank you very much, listeners, for bearing with us for the long gap between QEDs. But yeah, we're excited to get that show back on the road again. Also, Skeptics of the Pub Online has an event tonight. Alice?
Yes, tonight we have got Professor Manjeet Dosanjh, who will be speaking. She's part of the SIPO CERN speaker series. We've had quite a few CERN speakers recently, so we're doing a little CERN speaker series. And she's speaking on Project Stella, from Higgs to healthcare in challenging environments. I am going to be hosting that event. I've spoken to her already. She seems utterly amazing. I think it's going to be an absolute brilliant talk. So definitely tune in. That's tonight, 7 p.m. at twitch.tv/SITP.
Aside from that, then, I think that's all we're going to have time for.
I think so.
All that remains then is for me to thank Marsh for coming along today.
Thank you.
And thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
We've been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website, www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk, or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.